Hi everyone, this is a review on how to use regular verbs in Spanish in the present tense. I say regular because there's a lot of verbs that don't follow these rules, but most verbs will use these rules. One way you know you're using a verb in Spanish is if when you learn it, you see that it has the letters AR, IR, or ER at the very end of the word. Always look at the end of the word to learn a lot of important things about how to use it. So for example, if you've been taking some Spanish classes, you've probably seen the following verbs, the following actions: comer, estudiar, abrir, hablar, vender, compartir. I know all of those words are actions. They're all verbs because of the last two letters in each one. And you'll notice in this list, this is a very simple list, there's three different types. There's ones that end in the letters AR, IR, or ER. And it's important to notice that because there's three types, and all three types have their three sets of rules. And we're going to be talking today about how to use them in the present tense. So comer, you probably know, means to eat. If I want to use that in the present tense, you're basically saying I eat. You can technically kind of also say, oh, I am eating. But we'll be saying things like I eat, you eat, he eats, we eat, they eat. Estudiar means to study. So you'll be able to say a sentence like, oh, I study, you study, he studies, etc. So we're just using the present tense, nothing fancy like saying, oh, yesterday I studied, oh, I would like to study. No, just simple present tense gives you a good foundation for Spanish. A couple terms I use a lot when teaching Spanish. These are grammatical terms that you've probably never used before learning another language at an older age. One term is infinitive. What infinitive means is it's a description for a verb. So when the verb has not been conjugated, when it has not changed, when it's in its original form, we call that the infinitive form. It means it has not been changed to match the subject. So you've probably already learned in Spanish the verb ser. Ser is the infinitive form. But how do you use it in a sentence? You don't say, yo ser Peter. I would say, yo soy Peter. It's important to know that ser is the original form of the verb, but when you actually use it in a sentence, you have to change it to match the subject. And the other fancy grammatical term I use a lot is conjugation. This is what I talked about just now. When you change the verb to make it match the subject, that action is called conjugating. You really won't ever use these two words, infinitive, conjugate, outside of the context of learning a second language, probably at an older age. But these terms are very common in that context. And if you can understand these ideas, it makes talking about a language a lot easier. So basically, when I say conjugate, I mean make the verb match the subject. Like I said before, you don't say, yo ser Peter. No, yo soy Peter. Okay? Soy, because I changed it from ser, it's considered conjugated to the yo form. And it has all the different forms to say, I am, you are, he is. All the same word, to be, but it changes to match the subject. All right. To use most verbs in the present tense, like I said before, you're looking at the last two letters. And the last two letters are always either going to be AR, ER, or IR. And these three different options are going to each have their own different rules. And basically what you'll do, as you'll see in the charts, you'll cut off the last two letters and change the ending. So this is definitely a chart I would copy down if I were taking notes. This is an example of how to use a verb that ends in the letter AR, the letters AR. It's just one example of the verb hablar, to speak. So if I want to say I speak, I say yo hablo. Notice how the AR is chopped off and it's replaced with the letter O. Here it's the color red because they're really highlighting the fact that that is the ending that you would always use for any regular verb that ends with the letters AR in the yo form. So if I want to say I study, the verb is estudiar. I take off the AR and I add that letter O. Yo estudio. I study. I speak. I talk. You talk. Tú hablas. He or she talks. Habla. Nosotros hablamos. Ustedes hablan. Ellos hablan. I always know if students have taken good notes when I review this lesson, if they've made special highlight of those final letters, like here in the book, it's the color red, or maybe they've even just put the endings in a chart and not even put the root word. And hopefully you've got something written down to say to yourself, okay, the big idea here is my steps are to use this verb in a sentence to say I speak, you speak, we speak. You chop off the AR and you replace it with those letters that are in red to match whatever subject. If I'm saying, oh, we speak, I use the ending AMOS. So I take away the AR, you're left with the letters HABL, and you add the AMOS ending, hablamos. So please make note of that if you're writing this down in a notebook or something. Escuchar is another example of a verb that ends in the letters AR. We call that an AR verb. To say escuchar means to listen. So if I want to say something like, oh, I listen in class. Yo escucho en clase. I chopped off the AR. I replaced the AR with the letter O because that's what matches the yo form. And I'm done. Step 1, take off the AR. Step 2, add the proper ending. And your test will try to trick you. Wait, do I want the yo form, the to form, the he form, the she form, the we form, etc. So like I said in the chart from the previous slide, make sure you pay close attention to those endings. ER verbs. There's some similarities, but you'll notice that now, when it ends in the letters ER, same process, you chop off the last two letters and you replace it with the appropriate ending. Some similarities, some differences. The yo form is the same. The to form, instead of an AS, it's an ES now, which kind of makes sense because the original ending was ER, ES. If you pay close attention, you compare and contrast the endings that are in this chart with the endings for the AR verbs, you'll start to notice some patterns and it'll make it so much easier to remember them. So I'll let you look at that yourself. Make sure you copy down this chart. And like I said before, I know someone's taken good notes if they highlight the endings, if they change the color, because that's the thing you really need to pay attention to. This word here, vender, to sell, is just one example, but you would use the same exact rules in order to use the words comer, beber, to eat, to drink in a sentence. I eat, they drink, we eat, he sells. Okay? So this is the basic pattern. Pay close attention to those endings. And you'll notice that the E for the nosotros form at the top right, and in the vosotros form, it's highlighted in blue because it's one of the very small differences from IR verbs. So here's the final chart for how to use verbs that end in the letters IR. What you'll notice is that it's almost exactly the same as the chart for ER. However, the nosotros form and the vosotros forms are different by one letter. It's an I, which kind of makes sense because it ends in the letters IR. And again, this verb here, compartir, to share, is just one example. The same rules, the same pattern is followed by many, many different verbs. There's a lot of verbs that break this pattern, but if you're going to guess on how to use a verb, just follow these rules and it will get you pretty far. One special exception, might be hard to remember this now if you're trying to take this all in at once, the verb hacer, to do or to make, a verb that's used all the time. It follows the same exact rules for all verbs that end in the letters ER. The only difference is what it says here on the screen. In the yo form, the letter G appears. I think it just sounds better that way. Not to say yo hago, no, yo hago. Hago un sándwich. I'm making a sandwich. Carmen hace la tarea. Carmen is doing the homework or her homework. Okay, so it follows the regular rules for ER verbs, except it just has that one exception in the yo form. So again, the big ideas to use these verbs, you're using the present tense. Pay attention to those last two letters. There's three kinds. They all have their own rules according to those charts that hopefully you wrote down or you already have memorized. good to remember that ER and IR verbs are always very similar. That's something that's true throughout almost basically all of Spanish. And your job is to just remove those last two letters and add the appropriate ending to match the subject.